Hello and welcome to another episode of MAE's Summer Speaker Series, Industry Insights from Gator Grads. I'm Scott Banks, Professor and Interim Chair of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering here at the University of Florida. The goals of this new seminar series are to provide connection. All of us are sitting in various places, not on campus, in many cases not at our places of business, and we've lost that opportunity to interact, learn about job opportunities, business opportunities, connect with our alumni, etc. And so we've started this seminar series as a means, a channel, to provide some of that connection. If you find value in the materials that we're offering, please share that in the chat or via email to any of us at Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. We are eager to provide information, communication, and connection in these unusual times. Please use the chat on YouTube to ask questions of Larry Goldstein, our speaker today, once we go to the Q&A session. When you do ask a question, tell us who you are, your college major or job title, the institution you're currently affiliated with. Let us know a little bit of context for your questions. Again, as I said, the Q&A will follow the presentation, but we'll get going with that now. So today, we are joined by MAE alumni, Mr. Larry Goldstein. Larry earned his Bachelor of Science in 1986 in Mechanical Engineering here at the University of Florida, and then he earned an MBA from the University of Texas at Austin. Larry is an experienced investor and entrepreneur with a focus on early stage software and communication businesses. In this capacity, Larry has served as founder and CEO of numerous companies, with some of them growing to more than $1 billion in assets. We are delighted to have Larry here with us today to discuss his experiences and insights as an entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and chief executive officer. With that, Larry, welcome to our second of the summer seminar series. We are so grateful for you taking time out of your day to join us and make connection with the MAE community. And we very much look forward to your comments.
Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it. Hello, everybody. So I thought I would kind of walk through just a handful of things today, and I really like to make it interactive. And so hopefully you all have some questions and we can talk through things. I thought it would help just to start with kind of giving you a little bit of kind of my background and my path, and then some discussion of some of the things I've been involved in startup wise, and maybe talk through some of those kind of almost case studies, and then a little just about the venture capital kind of landscape, and then maybe a little bit of free guidance, and we can jump to some Q&A. So my path is a pretty varied one. I started out as was said, did my BS in mechanical engineering. I was lucky enough to get a couple of internships in the summers doing robotics at General Dynamics. We were working on the F-16 and we were automating pieces of the production there. So it was a really interesting way to kind of get going in my career. Loved it, interviewed a lot of different places after graduating, but decided to go back to General Dynamics in Fort Worth and was hired kind of full-time into an R&D lab that was doing advanced manufacturing. So it was a great kind of experience. F-16 was really, really interesting, and we worked on some pretty interesting projects to automate components of that. Learned a lot, met a lot of really interesting people. After a couple of years, I decided I wanted to go to grad school. I'd always wanted to do something on my own, do something business-wise. So I went to Austin, did my MBA at Texas. Don't worry, I am a huge Gator fan. I have a funny story about that, but we'll get to that later. I ended up, when I was doing my grad program, I got introduced to a small investment bank in Dallas who wanted to kind of be involved in what was happening. There was a lot going on the West Coast. There was a lot of technology in Texas, and felt like there was an opportunity to build something. So I actually interned between my 2 years at grad school at that bank, and then hired on there, doing both analytical work and investment banking work. So I learned a lot about the capital markets and the public investment side, but really was much more interested in being a principal investor. And at the time, Texas had started a program around trying to create more venture capital. And so I wrote a plan, went to my boss and pitched the idea, and he said, let's do it. And we created Seed Capital Partners within that bank. We did it for a while. I had a partner who had been an entrepreneur, who was a real mentor to me, a guy named Al Fleener. He had started a company called Intervoice, which was very successful, went public. It was one of the, if you're in phone trees dealing with voice response, you can blame it on him. But we were in there, and we realized very quickly that investment banking and principal investing are very different things. And we decided to spin out from the bank and take it out on our own. And we did that. We raised a traditional venture fund, and we began kind of executing on our plans. And so over the years, I mean, I've primarily operated as an investor and an entrepreneur. We focused a lot in the software and communication space, although I've done some things outside of that, just areas of interest and things that I got involved in. So I'll give you just, a little bit of kind of background on, some of the things I've been involved in, and maybe that'll help just sort of paint a picture of how sort of a career developed. But, just to kind of walk through some of these, I have a handful of active things that I've got going on, but over the years, I've been involved in a lot of different technologies at different stages. Early on, I was lucky enough to be involved. UT and MCC was an organization in Austin that was spinning out technologies. And we, for instance, acquired the rights and spun out a company called Pavilion Technologies, which was all around neural networks and AI. This is way back in the early 90s. So AI is big again now, but these things cycle and they just continue to move. And Pavilion had hundreds of patents in the areas of neural networks and AI. And it was 5 guys that built a really incredible company. But as we'll talk about, these early stage companies, they go through cycles, and entrepreneurship is not a straightforward path. And so Pavilion was one where, grew very quickly, looked like it would go public, went through some difficult times. We had to kind of fight our way through, and ended up in the end, that overnight success took 15 years, but was acquired by Rockwell Automation and makes up their advanced process control business. Another interesting company was involved in was a company called Vocal Data. And my current partner in NetZen was the founder of Vocal Data. We incubated the company within our offices. We funded it. It was really the first IP voice communications. And we were hosting what would be the old PBXs in the cloud. Today, that would be, cloud voice. But back then it was hosted PBX. Again, company built over time. We brought in strategic investors, had SAIC who owned Telcordia, which was big in communications, and we were able to build that company and sold it to Tekelec. And then, in the 90s, obviously the internet was happening, and I was lucky enough to get involved in one of the early streaming companies. And you'll see some of the connections here in the patterns is NetZen now, the company I'm really heavily involved in, is also doing things around streaming. But at that time, the internet was mostly text and content. And Mark Cuban and Todd Wagner, Todd was a close friend and was one of the entrepreneurs. And they decided that audio was going to happen. And they started a company called AudioNet, which became broadcast.com and was acquired by Yahoo and was one of the really early video streaming companies. And then things got really frothy in the 90s. And as an investor, you started seeing things that we were looking at ideas that looked like they'd been written over the weekend on a napkin, and people thought they were worth a lot of money. And we felt like things were getting really out of hand and decided to kind of shift and look at some other areas. And at that time, I was able to get involved in a company called DTM. DTM, again, was technology that was spun out of a university this time, which was University of Texas. This was all the rapid prototyping technology. It was called selective laser sintering, and this has all gotten, again, very big now. But if you go back in time, DTM stood for desktop manufacturing, and our equipment was the size of, 10 feet long and 6 feet high. So they had a vision, but they weren't there. Goodrich had invested lots of money, took the company public. It had over $80 million of investment, and it was a broken public company. And we were able to go in and buy controlling interest of that at a time when in the 90s, these things were, which really had nothing, were being valued at very high prices. So we took control of DTM and turned it around and grew it and sold it to 3D Systems, which had a different technology. DTM's technology was all around powdered materials versus liquids, and it was a really interesting company, exciting time. And so it did a couple of those. Did a second one, a company called AMX. It was another venture-backed company that had gone public and lost its way and went in with a team of people. And these are things you may see. You're back on campus in your audio and video control systems. AMX was one of the leaders in that. So we did a lot of different things. And so those are just some of the kind of companies I've been involved with. These are obviously things that have, worked out. There's also lots along the way when you're an investor in early stage companies that don't work out. Currently, I've gotten very active again in early stage things. And Juvo is a company, a friend of mine who I backed multiple times as a venture investor, was starting a company around the concept of unbanked people around the world. And on cellular phones, mostly around the world, people are having to use prepaid, and being able to lend and use data science to understand people is what Juvo does. And the concept is to deliver upstream financial services to those people. And then Market Course is sort of my latest foray in the machine learning and AI world. And I have a great partner there who's built a lot of really core technology around text analytics and uses that in the marketing space. And then NetZen is a company that I founded with a person I had backed multiple times, and we've been building. And it's really the concept of streaming applications, just like you stream your Netflix and Spotify today for movies and audio. We stream the apps that are on your devices, so you don't have to install those. That's a little bit of background on some of the things. All right, are we back?
We are back, and so you were saying.
Yeah, sorry about that. So anyways, I think, I was just trying to give you all some highlights on some of the things and just give you some perspective on kind of my career path. Not knowing exactly what the audience was, I know some people are interested in entrepreneurship and it's a very compelling thing. It's not for everybody. It's a very difficult path, but it's really exciting. So people look at it and they read the stories about all the success and it's one of those things where, it's probably the most difficult thing you'll ever do, but you get a lot out of it. It really takes an enormous amount of determination to succeed. There's a lot of ups and downs. The path of a lot of those companies that I walked through on the other side is not just A to B. The there are always ups and downs, and being able to kind of drive through that is really important. In a lot of the things I do, it's dealing with uncertainty and risk, and entrepreneurship's just at a very different level. For instance, as a venture investor, when I'm wearing that hat, I have investments in a lot of different things. So everything isn't based on one, outcome of one thing. But when you're the entrepreneur, that's really the way it is. And so there's a lot of risk that you have to decide whether that's something you want to deal with. And as I said, overnight success, it can take 10 years or more. A number of those investments that, I was in for a very long time, and some that I'm in today, I've been in for a long time, but some of that is just kind of what it takes. But, kind of the harder you work, the luckier you get. So, it might be something that some of you would want to consider. And, there's a lot out there about what makes a great entrepreneur. And I think it's just so different for everybody and just whatever aspect of what you do. But there are some attributes that really help, being very focused on what you're doing, having a level of persistence and determination, being able to really listen, but avoid the noise. There'll be a lot of naysayers. It's easy to shoot things down. It's easy to say no. You have to know when to listen to things that are important, but avoid the noise. And, my dad had a great saying, which was, you get two ears and one mouth, and they set you up that way. So you maybe try to listen twice as much. So, obviously you have to have a lot of self-confidence to go off and do something on your own. And entrepreneurs typically have, a real ability to look outside the box and think about things differently, and then be able to sell their vision. So, I think those are just some important attributes that I think, you can think about as you decide whether entrepreneurship makes sense for you. And really not knowing kind of what the total audience would be, I thought it would be helpful just to kind of lay out, okay, I decide to do this, how do companies get funded? And every company doesn't get funded. They don't have to. There are lots of businesses out there that don't make sense for outside investment. But kind of you got to go down the list. I mean, the first thing is getting as far as you can on your own sweat equity. I mean, really doing the work and trying to get as far as you can and validate things is really important, because it helps you maintain some real ownership in your venture. There's always kind of this next path, right, which is the friends and family. And that's a difficult one, because you're taking risk with people's money that you look them in the eye and them, and you don't want to mess it up. And so you have to be careful, and you have to think about that. But that's typically where people get kind of their next chunk of money. And then there's a whole kind of, community of angels that, is really the concept of people who have been successful on their own. They have some capital. They want to make investments in things and be involved. And that's an area where, there can be real positives, and there can be negatives too. The real positives are if you can find the right people and they can be helpful and they're knowledgeable and they can really help add value. They can be great. If you get somebody who doesn't really understand what you do and has poor expectations, then those can be problems. The angel community has actually developed a whole lot more, over the last 10 years. It's really incredible how many people are out there and how organized that's become. So that's another great area. And then typically there's a very, very small number of companies that really make sense for venture capital. And these are the ones that need a lot of capital and have high growth expectations. And, and the idea, right, is to be able to raise capital and generate a return. And then sort of the next level is sort of companies that have already developed and they're able to, show real financial performance. Then there's a whole set of investors that, is kind of growth capital investors. They're willing to invest larger dollars to really put fuel on the fire and accelerate. And then, many of you've probably heard, the term private equity, and private equity is more, larger companies and, buying out, existing businesses and fixing them and, there's typically debt involved in those kind of things. And then, there's always the concept of public investment, and, very, very small number of companies can go public, and that changes in cycles over time. So that's just a little bit about kind of the investment landscape that's out there. And as I said, there's lots of different, ways people get funded and different paths people take. When I look at kind of early stage investment, where I've spent most of my time, I've done some later stage things, but mostly I really enjoy the early stage. It's way more than an idea. People sit around a lot and think of great ideas and talk about their ideas, but to really build something, there's some kind of major things, people look for, that, we look for, right? You're looking at the team. You've got to take the time to build out a team of people that can help you. None of us have every skill ourselves. And so the idea of being able to, attract and bring people together that have different skill sets is really important, and something that you try to evaluate. And, in early stage investment for venture capital, you're really looking for large growing markets. It's just a whole lot easier to jump on the train of the internet when it's growing, because you can make a lot of mistakes in a big market and still end up with something that's a really big opportunity. Clearly, developing a really compelling product or service, something differentiated, something, you've thought of that, you can kind of change how the world's operating. And then not just the product, but how you distribute it. What's the business model? How does that change over time? And then just trying to evaluate the ability for people to execute. So, I think, it's early stage investments, difficult from the perspective of you don't really have enough data. So you kind of have to imagine what's possible, and you have to validate risks where you can. And you're always working with pretty imperfect information, but over time, you're trying to eliminate risks and look for opportunity. And so, kind of my message is, there's a set of people out there, why not you and why not now? If entrepreneurship is something that you're interested in, I always tell people the time to do it is when you're young, because it's not just being young. It's really not having all the responsibilities that you're going to have later in life, things that are going to slow you down and potentially, limit your ability to go take these risks. So, I think it's just one of those things that, there's no time like the present if it's something that you're interested in. And if there's a failure, the great thing about this country is you can always come back and try something different. And so, starting young and kind of learning, there's nothing wrong with that. And this is, just a quote I love, and it really is, I think anytime you do difficult things or entrepreneurship or, investing, you're going to be failures. But, I'm not going to read this to you, but the idea is basically get in the arena and do it. And whether you're successful or you fail, it's a great path. So, so with that, I'm going to move on and just give you a few of kind of my free advice, and take it for what it is. I believe in at least technical things. The technical skills are the table stakes. I know we have a lot of engineers on the call, and that's kind of expected. The things I think really help you in, going after these things and in your career is really being able to communicate. And so I would just urge people to really learn to write well and communicate your ideas, and learn to speak and kind of, to tell your story. Because a lot of entrepreneurship and startups is, that vision and positioning of what your story is and being able to communicate that. Amazon does an absolutely really amazing thing, and any of you, ought to go off and kind of, read up on this a little bit, but, they kind of have this concept of this 6-page document that they write. You don't go into rooms and do PowerPoints. You kind of really have to spend time to write what you're going to do. And it's a really great way to kind of flesh out ideas and really have to think through things. It's a lot easier to put a few bullets on a slide than it is to be concise and write what you're doing. And on the speaking side, if you're doing entrepreneurship, you've got to be able to attract people, you've got to be able to lead people, and you've got to be able to communicate to people that maybe aren't as technical as you. So I think that's a really important set of skills that it's worth spending time developing. I know everybody out there today is big on the social networking, and it's great. It's something we didn't have, and I get it. And it's an important thing, but I also think, even though we're stuck in this environment today where it's difficult to have kind of our normal real world connections and communication, I think it's really important as you develop your careers to build those real world connections as well. They'll really help you in the future. So I think that's an important one that I think really positive. And then, this is something, I know my partner always tells me when we interview a salesperson that if they're really good, he knows he's not going to like them because he just doesn't like that personality. But and he's a really technical guy. But my message is, you don't have to be in sales, but you need to know how to sell. And I don't just mean selling your product. I mean, you really have to be able to sell and communicate your vision. And so you'll see a lot of my messages, that there's a lot more of the other skills around that are worth spending time trying to develop, because I think they're important for you to be successful, whether you're trying to attract a key employee or bring in a CEO for your company, or, sell your product to a strategic partner or bring in an investor. Whether we like it or not, it's all selling. And kind of the last one, this is something I believe in, and I think it's really important. It's been important for me building my career, is, finding and cultivating mentors that really can be helpful to you. Especially when you're young, people are really open to being helpful, especially if they think that they can be helpful. And building those relationships can really help you along the way. So I think it's a very important thing that I'm sure a lot of you already know, but it's just one of those where I think it's worth mentioning. And so with that, sorry for the technical hiccups, and I'm open for questions and glad to answer what I can.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing those experiences and the trajectory. What we're going to do, there's a little bit of a delay between our conversation on Zoom and the stream. So Michael is going to take the questions off of YouTube, put them into the chat, and then I will relay them to you, Larry.
Okay.
But as you were speaking, I was writing down a ton of notes because I want to know all the answers here. It was one of the first things you said is that you wrote a plan and you pitched it to your boss. And then towards the end, you came back to communication skills and the importance of written and oral communication. How did you get those skills? Was it just sort of trial and error? Did you write a lot when you were in school, or how do you get up to that level of facility?
Yeah. Well, I mean, interestingly, my dad was a really incredible speaker. And so I was lucky to have a mentor early that made me know that was important. And I did spend a lot of time writing. I did write a lot of my, I wrote a lot, I'd have ideas and I'd think about them. And at that time, it's not really the same these days. I mean, typically today when people come up with business plans, they're not encouraged to write a business plan. And I'm not encouraging people to either at that level that we used to. We used to write these super detailed plans, and now it's really all pitch decks. But But in my business life, I mean, I've just always found that it's really important to be able to write some concise, one pagers that really get the message across. I've just done it my whole career. And then I kind of started following the whole Amazon thing and how they operate on that stuff. And I thought it was really interesting, and just how they look at customers and work backwards and those kind of ideas. And so I think you can develop it different ways. It doesn't mean you have to take a class on it, but you just have to get comfortable that that you can do it, because it is a key thing that that helps you in your career.
Yeah. And maybe for the students that are watching, this will help them understand why we demand all of these long format lab reports and everything, where we actually care about grammar and punctuation and basically execution of that communication. Larry, you described a number of companies that you were involved in, whether it was in the early neural networks, the communications, additive manufacturing, and in each case, it seems that there was a nascent technology that you were able to get in. And did you, as a fundamentally trained as an engineer, was that essentially a competitive advantage, and that you had the background and the framework to understand what was being proposed, and did that differentiate your ability to interact and capitalize on the opportunities, as opposed to somebody who didn't have that technical?
Yeah, no, I think it absolutely helps. I mean, you're never an expert in all these technologies, but it really helped me early in my career to be able to communicate and talk and meet with these really young, smart engineers, and at least have a framework to understand the concepts, and be able to kind of get at a different level than maybe just a pure finance investor that was coming in and having the same conversation. Now, I'm not trying to say that I knew all these technologies the way they knew them, but having the exposure and having the robotics background helped a lot, and understanding how manufacturing worked by working in manufacturing a little bit helped me early on. Some of the things we saw as problems, that helped me understand that the additive stuff was really interesting when I was looking at that. And so, yeah, and it also helps me even in what I'm doing today, because even though I'm not a software engineer at the level of the guys that I work with, I can sit in a room and understand the problems. And I think the biggest thing that the engineering stuff did for me is just that problem solving. I mean, that's what we all do, right? We're looking at a set of facts and we're able to problem solve, and that's important. So I think it's not necessarily that you're digging deep in every technology and understanding it at that level, but it's that you can kind of sit in the room and be somewhat knowledgeable about it.
Yeah, that's really valuable. Two questions regarding what current students can do. So, you pointed out that you were on that early, kind of the bleeding edge of some of those technologies that we now see ubiquitously. What would you encourage on the technical side, current students to say, hey, here's an opportunity that, if you had a little bit of expertise or exposure to this, take that class? Are there any up your list?
Well, I mean, obviously, I've been involved in a bunch of different AI type companies since the early 90s. And we keep going through cycles of changing the name from, artificial intelligence to neural nets to, data science to machine learning to AI. It's all, and I think that's going to be an amazing area, right? I mean, obviously, there's a lot going on there, and that's really incredible. And I know that's a focus, and that's a really interesting one. One that I think would be interesting, if I were starting over now and I was looking at something, and it's not something I know really anything about, so I'll preface it with that. But I think this, especially with what's going on in the world, I think just this sort of the intersection of the biology and computation would be an incredibly interesting area to investigate what opportunities there might be. But like I said, it's not something that I really know much about. I just think, God, if I had a lot of time, I would really think that would be an incredibly interesting area. And then, robotics again has now come back and seems like it would be a really interesting space to spend time. I mean, I was doing it way back when we really had nothing, and now there's so much, and there seem to be a lot of opportunities that will be happening there. So I think those are some that I think would be kind of, cool areas to spend some time.
Well, I just wrote those down for my fall course schedule. I appreciate that. So that was on the technical side. On the business side, so somebody that's on the cusp of getting their bachelor's or master's or even a doctorate that's interested in entrepreneurship, this startup challenge that you explained. How do you get started? Are there courses preparatory, or do you just dive in?
Well, I mean, I think there's so much resource today that there wasn't, way back. There are a number of places where you can just go learn so much just by, reading through their material. Y Combinator has incredible resources out there on their site. How to start a startup and how to pitch your startup and how to get funded. And there's a group called the Kauffman Foundation that a guy named Ray Smiler was in charge of for a while, and I worked for him when I was at UT at the IC Squared Institute. And they built an incredible program that's to train venture investors, young venture investors, and it's sponsored by big venture funds that will hire interns out of those programs. And there's tons of learning there. But there's so much public information now. There's so many, you can follow so many of the really high, venture investors are out there publishing information about how they think about things, and all the legal documentation's out there to look at stuff. So I think there's a lot of resource. I don't think you have to do it through taking a class. I think you can really dig in on your own and self-learn a bunch of this information. So those are some I would just throw out as suggested ideas of places to start. And you can definitely kind of circle off of that.
Well, that's great. So that was actually questions from Blake Studer and Andre Aji. I combined them into one.
Okay.
We've got going back to sort of the creation story when you went from being a robotics involved engineer over to the business side. What was it? What were the factors that drew you into that entrepreneurism, startup, the riskier path than sort of a normal engineering job?
Yeah. Well, I always wanted to I always thought I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to start a company. That was kind of my thing. But when I was in grad school at UT, we had a number of venture investors. Actually, a couple guys from Austin Ventures came in. They were a big fund at the time. They had done the first local area networking company called Synoptics that had gone public, and you heard the story, and it was like this amazing thing, right? And they had been in a bunch of interesting things. And then I also met a mentor, a professor of marketing at UT, a guy named Shelby Carter. He had been head of worldwide sales at Xerox and IBM, and he was an incredible personality, very charismatic guy. And I got to know him, and as I was kind of learning about it, I got offered to work at this investment bank because they had nobody that really understood technology, and they were trying to build this technology, analyst shop. And the people I worked with there ended up all over Wall Street. It's really it's a great network for me long term. But because of that, I mean, I had this offer to go do this, and Shelby told me, like, you got to be out of your mind if you don't take that. So I kind of diverted from, I'm just going to go start my own company, to getting into sort of the investment side. Then when I learned that, it just became really interesting. And I met my business partner at the time, that had also been a mentor, Al Fleener, and we decided to build seed capital together. And that was kind of it's one of those, you get lucky by being in the right place and meeting the right people. So.
Yeah, well, it's a great story, but clearly you were predisposed. Sort of a chance favors the prepared mind. Sort of framework. Yeah, that was from Min Cho Lee. The next question that comes up is similar to one that I had written down. This is from Noah Roberson. As someone with a significant influence and say-so in so many different companies, what kind of personal systems have you created for yourself to stay ahead, balance your focuses and priorities, and provide each company with the best of your effort and ideas? Noah, that is a beautifully worded question. I just put, Larry, how do you organize your day?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, to be honest, at the moment, I am spending most of my effort on my active participation day to day in NetZen. The other two active things I have going on, I'm an investor, I'm an advisor, I'm a board member, but I'm not day to day. And so I'm available on Slack to them, and I have Slack channels with my partners on those. They're people I've worked with and known a really long time. I'm really not, somebody who like works 9 to 5. I mean, I'm on, if someone texts me at night, we do what we need to do. And so, on Juvo, for instance, I mean, we have board meetings every maybe 6 weeks, but the CEO, there's a guy I've worked with for 25 years and we're close friends. And, if he texts me, and I mean, we interact quite a bit, but it's not something where I'm day to day involved in what they're doing. I'm more an advisor in those, where I spend most of my time and focus is on, what we're doing at NetZen. So.
Okay. And do you see examples of people who can successfully balance, high intensity activity in 3, 4, 5 different things, or do you just end up being diluted and you're better off focusing?
No, I mean, I think I've made that mistake in the past. I mean, you can get diluted. You think that you can, but I mean, luckily in my companies that I'm involved in, there's another entrepreneur that's my co-founder who this is their thing, right? And they're the technical founder in those companies, and they have an absolute 100% focus, and that's the only thing they are doing. So, I think if you're going to do something startup wise, you really have to commit yourself to that. And it becomes a problem even within a startup, that you have so many opportunities if you have a broad technology, and you do have to focus your efforts, because you can get, even at that level, get distracted to be doing too many things that it can do. And you kind of have to be that singular focus on the opportunity that you see as the most important one.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So Eric asks, now that we've talked about these successes in managing all of this in a positive way, he says, can we hear an example of a startup that failed? And how were you feeling as part of that experience?
Absolutely.
You have to make, the lessons learned, that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was involved in a really cool, very cool technology in Austin, a company that started off called Layer In Networks. It became a company called Brightstream. And it was a combination of an SSL processor and a network processor. So a super complex chip. And I knew the entrepreneurs that were the software piece of it, and I got involved in a semiconductor deal that was incredible opportunity, and it failed because at the same time, there was a company called Cavium, and Cavium focused on an SSL processor only. Cavium became a multi-billion-dollar success. They offered to buy us early in the process. We thought we had a better, we had the more complex, better solution. We missed our tape out of our chip, didn't work the first time. That's in semiconductors is millions of dollars of loss. And at the time, we missed that window, and we missed an enormous opportunity. So we had the right concept, the right idea. We had a really good team. We had raised a lot of capital. We lost a lot of money, and it was a really difficult situation. But it's those are the kind of things that happen. So yeah, I mean, and I got plenty more behind that. But that was that was good. But I did learn that I wasn't a semiconductor expert. But I thought there was so much software in it that was what made the leap. And our co-investors were semiconductor experts, and we just, even with all that expertise, we weren't able to make it work.
Interesting. Okay. Painful but useful experience.
Oh yeah.
On the experience side, obviously we've got a lot of students who are excited at the prospect of entrepreneurism and startups. Do you find that, for example, in your case, you spent some time in a sort of a regular engineering role at a big multinational company before you went onto the entrepreneurial path? Do you think that was a benefit to have that perspective, contact from the big company, or do you think that the naive energy and creativity of somebody who hasn't yet been out in the quote unquote real world is actually a benefit for an entrepreneur?
I think you can obviously, either way can work. For me, it was great to work in a company for a while and just even understand what that means, right? Just having to deal with some of the stuff you don't necessarily love to do, but you have to do because you have a boss and they want you to do it. And, those different things. And just for me, it was important for understanding like how real manufacturing worked. You can talk about it, all the time, but if you don't see it, it's just something that, is hard to kind of really, kind of get that real world experience. So for me, it was great. I think from a business school perspective, I think it'd be very hard to go to business school with no experience in business at all, never being exposed to anything. So for me, it was good, but obviously there are many cases where you can show of brilliant, very successful people that never did anything except for go do their thing. So I wouldn't discourage it.
Yeah, you can find a way either way.
Yeah, I think so.
You emphasized as an investor looking at the team in a business that you're looking at. Where did you get your, what would you identify as the experiences where you learned how to work with the team, and then maybe reflect that on, most of us are on a campus environment with various clubs, organizations, that kind of thing. What did you find valuable in your trajectory, and what might you suggest for folks that are, here at the University of Florida?
Yeah, look, it's throughout your life, right? I was lucky enough to have the experience of, high school sports that you learn teamwork, and you have the ups and downs of, sports. And, I did that throughout my whole life. I continued to do that. I love that aspect. On the business side, I worked in a really dysfunctional investment bank early on, and investment banking in that time frame, that wasn't unusual. I'm not being negative from the perspective of that I got incredible experiences there, but it was dysfunctional. You learn what not to do to motivate people and to lead people and to organize people. And then being able to be exposed to so many different companies and see the positives and negatives, it just helps you kind of think through, okay, having some emotional intelligence about how to deal with people is important, and none of us are perfect at it. So but yeah, I think you just kind of learn throughout all these different aspects of your life.
Distill all the different experiences that you have. And that kind of relates to the importance of networking and establishing mentors that you highlighted. Did those just kind of happen organically in your trajectory, or were you did you go to, startup related, entrepreneurism related mixers in Austin, sort of the society and affinity group sort of things?
Yeah, for me, it happened more through the connections of my business, right? My first, real mentor was my dad, who was, just an incredible force. And that was really helpful to me. And then, I moved to Fort Worth. I met a family that kind of took me under their wing, and the guy was really involved in the investment world and was a great mentor and explained a lot of just generality of kind of how that worked. And then I went to grad school, and as I said, I had the guy who I'd mentioned, Shelby, that, helped me. And then, when I started my, venture ideas and wrote my plan, I was trying to find somebody that filled the gap of what I didn't have, which was a lot of, company building experience. And I met a number of people and really clicked with Al Fleener, and he became a real mentor to me. And then, down the road, I, was building my investment portfolio and met a gentleman up in Chicago who's been an amazing mentor to me, who had done lots of things, a guy named Vic Morgenstern. And so, it's just, there are others, but these all just sort of happened naturally. They weren't necessarily, me seeking out, but seeking out is fine as long as there's a reason and there's a connection you can make.
Right, but kind of leveraging the shared affinities and just developing those relationships along the way. This is fabulous. So I've got time. The timekeepers are letting me know I've got time for one more question.
Okay.
Maybe talk about how this global pandemic, has affected the companies you're working with and your mid-long-term outlook. What do things look like in this during and post COVID-19 world?
Yeah. Well, a couple things on that. On the how it affects us. I mean, luckily for the companies I'm actively involved in, they're all software oriented. So from the perspective of, if you've seen the meme on, social media, a software developer working at the office sitting in front of a monitor is the same as a software developer working at their house sitting in front of a monitor. So from that perspective, it's obviously we can keep doing that part of our job. But you do lose the collaboration piece. Even though we have Zoom, people sitting in the room next to each other and interacting, that's been gone. So that's, for us, even though I know people say, oh, we'll just all keep working from home, I think you do lose something there. And then from the business side of it, it's very, existing business you have, that's all fine and everybody's working, but developing new business is difficult when you're just doing it over Zoom. So I think that's going to be a challenge for early stage companies to figure out, is how do we change in this world so that we can, kind of develop our business side of things over conferencing, and hopefully we'll be back to a little more normalcy, in some period when it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that, Larry. I can't thank you enough for joining us today. This has been fascinating for me and exciting, and based on the questions in the chat box, a lot of interest in presumably taking engineering and teamwork and leadership skills that our attendees are growing and being able to apply them in a in a milieu like you've described. So thank you for being one of our great and committed alumni. That's going to wrap up our second summer seminar series, Industry Insights with Gator Grads. If folks who are watching this enjoy the content, hit the like button down there. You'll get a notice when the next videos are posted. By all means, let us know at Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering if there's anything, content, information, opportunities, and connection that we can provide to keep everybody's process and education and growth going while we are physically separated. So with that, we'll see you next week. We've got Amit Vora from Promaxo, a Bay Area startup that'll be joining us more in the medical devices space. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody online next week. Take care, and thanks, Larry. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.